Right, good morning all. It's 10 o'clock and we'll make a start. Welcome to January's edition of Dorset Council's Audit and Governance Committee. My name is Councillor Matthew Hall and I am the chairman of this committee. First of all, if we do a quick round robin of the committee members to see who's here, please. If you could give a brief introduction to yourselves and confirm your attendance. Richard.
Councillor Richard Biggs, representing Poundbury Ward and the Vice Chairman.
Thank you. Susan.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Susan Cocky, representing Portland.
Rod. Rod Atkins. Okay. Janet.
Councillor Janet Dover, representing Coal Hill and Wimborne Minster East.
Barry.
Councillor Barry Gorringe, St Leonard's and St Ives.
Mike.
Councillor Mike Parks, Ferndown North. For information, Matt, there are some severe internet problems in Ferndown. That might be why Rod's not with us at the moment.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Bill Pipe.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Bill Pipe. I represent Minster, Litchett, Matravers and Upton.
Thank you, Bill. Claire.
Good morning all, Claire Sutton representing Rodwell and Wyke in Weymouth.
And finally Bill Pipe, Trite.
Good morning all, it's Bill Trite representing Swanage.
Thank you very much. If officers can do a brief introduction to themselves when they do their first bit on the agenda, please. So agenda item number 1 is apologies for absence. Do we have any that have been listed, please, Susan?
I've received no apologies for absence, Chairman, although obviously Rod Atkins is currently not with us.
Thank you. Agenda item 2 is the minutes. Does any member have any issues with the minutes that were sent out by Susan? If so, could you please put them in the chat bar now? As nothing is showing up, we'll accept those minutes and I'll sign those the next time I'm in County Hall. I think I'm going to have this huge mountain of things to sign. Agenda item number 3, declarations of interest from anybody. Is there? No, thank you. Agenda item number 4, public participation. I believe, Susan, we haven't got any.
That's correct, Chairman, none today.
Oh, one day we will, one day. Right, into the main crux of the agenda, agenda item number 5, which is the internal audit plan progress. This will be presented to us by Rupert and Sally from SWAP. Before I hand over to you, Rupert, can I just say on behalf of Dorset Council that again we would like to thank your staff for the help that they're giving Dorset Council during this COVID pandemic. Really, really appreciated. Over to you, Rupert. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for the thanks. I'll make sure I pass those onto the team as well. Thank you. So I'm Rupert Bamberger, Assistant Director with SWAP Internal Audit Services. We are the Council's internal audit. This is one of our regular internal audit progress reports, summarising internal audit work since our last progress report in October. It includes any key messages and brief details of any of those audit reviews we have assessed as receiving limited assurance. So I won't run through the paper page by page, but I will just highlight some of the key sections, if I may, and some of the messages coming out. Firstly, page 1 of our report, which I believe is page 14 of the agenda pack. This obviously captures our ongoing audit opinion, along with the fact that no new significant risks have been identified in our work since our last report. The 2 previous significant risks that we did report are currently undergoing follow-up work. And we hope to be in a position to confirm a sort of positive follow-up message from both of these reviews at the April committee meeting. We also highlight there on that page that since our last progress report, we have issued 5 limited assurance opinions on the areas we have audited. I would, however, point out that SLT and senior managers from across the organisation are increasingly directing internal audit work to known or potential areas of risk. And this has naturally resulted in an increase in the limited assurance opinions that we are providing. So I believe from the 5 that we are reporting this time, 4 were requested by management, and that's actually a really constructive and positive way of working. Moving on to page 3 of our report, which again I think is page 16 of the agenda pack. This page attempts to map a coverage of our internal audit work against the authority's corporate risks. So for the first column on the left there, titled coverage, so for each of the 21 corporate risks, how much internal audit coverage for the year do we currently have? And then that second column, for any internal audit work completed against those like the chairman says, we've redeployed a number of internal audit teams into the business and continue to do so to help with the COVID response. And we've therefore provided far less audit coverage than we usually would at this stage of the year. Although from the start, we've been clear that we see this as being the best use of audit resources at this time. Moving down to the next page, I believe, page 17, just a reminder to members that this contains a hyperlink to our live audit plan tracker that we've now developed. And this effectively captures all audits underway, audits planned and any audits removed, and captures that in a live environment. So I would encourage members to access this or try to access this, request access if you're unable to do so, as it does provide that complete picture of our audit work at any point in the year, so not just at meetings. And then the final section I was going to flag obviously is Appendix A, which runs from page 20 through to page 24. This just sets out a small bit of detail for each of those audit reviews that we have assessed as limited assurance since our last audit progress report, which, like I said, I believe is 5 audits. And just a reminder for members that at the start of this financial year, we did slightly change our audit assurance opinions to align with the SIPFA recommended terminology. So any references you see there to partial assurance, they're effectively the same as what we call limited assurance now, but just in case there's any confusion regarding that. So like I say, 5 limited assurance audits there within that appendix, a brief summary of findings for each. I wasn't planning to go through each one in detail, but obviously happy to expand on any area of the report as required or to answer any sort of broader questions at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rupert. Members, if you've got any questions, can you please put RTS in the chat bar? Rupert, can you just confirm there's obviously a number of comments you've made within this report about updates coming through and when planned recommendations are to be commenced by. The dates on them, do you decide those dates? Does the line manager decide those dates? How are those dates established?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Primarily by management. So we'll ask management to provide an estimated sort of completion or mitigation date. Obviously, we will sort of challenge that if that's either too optimistic in our view, or on the other hand, sort of perhaps too far in the future. So primarily driven by officers, but obviously we'll review that in conjunction with them.
So are you happy with the dates which are listed at the moment? I'm just trying to get out the idea. We got a number of things which need improving through this report, and of course we're still going through the pandemic at the moment, and I just want to be reassured that those dates are seen by all as being a realistic time frame to work in.
Yes, I think so. I mean, like I say, we before sort of signing off or finalising a report, we will check we're happy with those dates. Again, in this sort of environment, I think we're trying to be more forgiving or understanding. So I think we're encouraging managers to obviously complete it as fast as possible, but equally understanding the circumstances that they're facing.
Brilliant, thanks, Rupert. Right, we've got a number of questions coming in for you. The first one is from Councillor Susan Cocking, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Rupert. It's on page 5 of the report and page 18 of the agenda. It's about duplicate payments, and it says that you've identified a further 34,450 of duplicate payments, which brought it into excess of 103,000. My question is, I know that you've identified it and you've got a process in place now. Do we recover that money at all that's made to duplicate? Is that, I'm assuming that's to a company or a supplier that's been paid twice. Do we recover that money at all, or is that written off basically? So that's my question really, is do we recover it? Can we recover it? And I know that you've got process, and hopefully that will mitigate any further duplicate payments, but I just make sure that we're not actually paying people twice or 3 times.
Yeah, really good question. I think the simple answer is yes. I believe the vast majority of it is recovered. I'm not sure if any finance colleagues on the call want to provide a bit more detail around that. But I know certainly from our work that we look at the recovery aspect in some senses, but obviously the finance team will be able to give hopefully a clearer picture, perhaps in terms of percentages.
Do we have Aidan or Jim on that would like to make a comment on that one?
Yeah, morning Chair, morning everybody. Jim McManus, Corporate Director, Finance and Commercial. Rupert, your ambition for my knowledge of the percentages of how much is recovered is impressive. I don't know off the top of my head a percentage figure. So it's fair to say the process up to now has relied on quite a lot of work that Swap have done for us on a database and taken a lot of our AP data offline and away to do that. So the first part of the process is it identifies a lot of payments that have similar characteristics that could therefore be duplicates. That work is taken away by the AP team and worked through to find any that actually are duplicates. And then Susan, you'll be pleased to hear that we do actually go after any of those that are duplicates. It's very difficult to make a duplicate payment through SAP if something goes through our ordering process, although people can sometimes authorise things for payment twice. Most of these payments are people that we are generally in some sort of longer term business relationship with. So effectively what happens is we net any duplicate payments off of future payments that are required. Colleagues in the AP team, Claire Moorcroft, has led a piece of work where we've implemented a new piece of software, AP Forensics, which Rupert's colleagues have actually supported us with in its early days of implementation. What that does is actually do a lot more work in advance. So SAP's standard checking module for duplicate payments is fairly rudimentary. The AP Forensics work is much more sophisticated and will generate a file for checking before payments are actually made. So there's a lot more work gone into designing duplicate payments out of the system rather than inspecting for them afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jim. I believe Aidan, you've got some data available.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, Aidan Dunn, Exec Director of Corporate Development. I've just looked up a quick SWOT report they shared with us earlier, and looking at the first quarter of last financial year, 1st of April to 30th of June 2020, the amount outstanding now is £459.68. So we started off with that's at the beginning with duplicate payments of the order of £189,000, but we do pursue them, and as Jim has just described, using the methodology. So there's a tiny amount outstanding, and that's what we're continuing to pursue.
Do you want to come back on anything, Susan?
No, thank you. I'd just like to thank the officers for their due diligence on recovering the money, because it's council taxpayers' money at the end of the day, and I don't think they'd be very happy if people getting paid twice. But no, thank you for your work, for doing it now and in the past, and for recovering the money. So thank you.
Next question comes from Councillor Bill Pipe.
Good morning, Chairman. Rupert, you say there are some gaps, weaknesses and areas of non-compliance, and that you have reasonable levels of confidence that things will be brought into line. Is there anything serious in those gaps, weaknesses and areas of non-compliance that we should be aware of?
Thank you, Councillor. I think it's probably the fact that, like I said in my update, there's been no new significant corporate risks. So that's how we sort of assess the sort of risk level that we believe we should draw to your attention. So since the last report, there's been no new ones. However, like we've included in our progress report, obviously last time We reported about the home to school transport and also the sort of the virtual school, which has been ongoing for some time. Both those areas are subject to follow up, and like I say, hopefully we'll be able to provide a sort of a positive follow up picture at the next committee. So in terms of that sort of risk level, that's usually what we sort of assess it on, in terms of that significant corporate risk, to sort of really bring those issues to your attention. So like I say, those two sort of outstanding ones, but since that, no new ones from our work.
Okay, so why do you only have reasonable levels of confidence that things will be brought back into line? Why are you not a little bit more confident?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It might be to do with terminology. Believe it or not, reasonable levels of confidence are quite positive in internal audit terminology. But I think it's a balance that obviously the virtual school, like I say, that's been ongoing for some time. But however, we do have reasonable levels of confidence that there is a plan in place to sort of turn that one around. And again, like we've touched on earlier today, I think it's understanding that there's an awful lot going on, and therefore some things are taking longer than they might have previously done so to sort of be mitigated. So I think reasonable is probably a sort of
good description. I'll take that, Rupert.
Okay, thank you, Councillor.
And just to finally, Chairman, there's 74% of actions, follow-up actions, still outstanding since the last quarter. Is there a reason why that figure is so high? Staffing levels, COVID, I can understand, but is there a stumbling block in there somewhere?
I don't know, Aidan, if you want to give an answer to Bill on that one, because I think that's a bit more about process.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, the 74, so that is this on page 17, outcomes from follow-up audit work, percentage of recommendations that remain outstanding, 74%. Yeah, I think as a senior leadership team, Rupert comes and talks us through this regularly, and we're putting an increased focus on it as an organisation. I think Councillor Pipe's right in the sense that there's been an awful lot going on with the distraction of COVID and that sort of thing. But as a new organisation, a relatively new organisation, I think there has been up to this point a degree of still trying to find our feet. And what Audit are doing is very helpfully focusing on where we really need to put our efforts, and that's what we're doing. So I'm expecting that figure to improve over the coming months as we're able to bring more focus to it.
Okay, but there's no actual like stumbling block within that 74%, but if, for instance, you cleared that stumbling block, then overnight, sort of say 50% of that would disappear.
No, because it's a whole variety of recommendations and a whole variety of different departments across the organisation. My take on it, Rupert, is that this isn't a simple blockage. It is about the various recommendations needing to be implemented in various means. Rupert, can I just verify that? Is that correct?
Yes, completely correct, Aidan. And I'm not sure if I know David's on the call and from Mark's team as well. They've helpfully introduced a sort of a fairly recent process, which is really helping sort of drive implementation of recommendations. So I think that figure should start to come down soon. Obviously within the COVID context, but I believe that figure will come down soon because, like I say, there's a lot more focus on outstanding recommendations at the moment than before. So hopefully that figure will come down shortly.
Okay, thank you, Rupert. Thank you, Aidan. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Bill. Next question is from Councillor Claire Sutton.
Thank you, Matt. I just wanted to say this is a really welcome report, because usually I nitpick these reports, but actually I didn't really feel much to nitpick at this one, which is great. So I was just going to concentrate on the added value section, and obviously I was going to make a similar question to Susan, and you don't need to answer this question, anybody, but obviously rather than picking up where duplicate payments are being made. Obviously, ideally you want to be addressing that further upstream, don't you, and identifying why the situation would arrive in the first place, that a duplicate payment might take place, so you don't have to mop it up afterwards. But the second thing is, I remember in the previous incarnation of this committee being quite critical of the added value section and saying, you know, why are you doing all these extra things? You don't need to be doing all these extra things. But actually, I felt that the added value in this section was extremely appropriate and really helpful, particularly in the current context, especially in relation to this one-page report idea, because obviously with managers so much more overstretched than ever before, actually, you know, getting straight to the nub of what the issue is really great. So it's just a commendation, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I mean, I think, Aidan, I'll echo some of Claire's comments here. I mean, the issue with the duplicate payments, to many of us, I think, is slightly concerning, as I would consider from my professional background that purchase ledger work should make sure that these types of duplications don't happen. And, you know, we're not talking about small amounts of money for most councillors to come to terms with, or also members of the public to come to terms with. Yes, it might be small in terms of our overall budget, but it just seems that perhaps we don't have the necessary check processes in place that still allows these overpayments to be happening. Because I remember Rupert's been bringing issues with duplicate payments now since probably the start of this council, and I think want some reassurance that we're doing some work so that the council is heading in the right direction, because it is good that we recover most of that money, but in essence that's taking officer time to recover that money, which surely could be better spent elsewhere if we had a system in place which stopped this type of duplicate payments from happening in the first place. I don't know if you want to make a comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with you. We wouldn't want to make any, or we don't want to make any duplicate payments at all. It's unnecessary, and as you said, the recovery process itself is then sort of a further time and effort. So the really important thing is to get upstream, as you just described, to make sure that we don't make duplicate payments in the first place, and that's through a combination of the authorization and the approval mechanism, all the way through to the system spotting when we've got the same invoice numbers and that sort of thing. I think what we find with an organisation our scale and complexity and so many colleagues involved, that we are finding that duplicate payments are going through the system. We're tracking them down, spotting them, tracking them down, getting the money back. But we really need to make sure that we learn why and understand why, and make any adjustments necessary, be that sort of extra training for staff, or whether it's a word with a supplier about clarity of their invoices, or it may be system corrections as well. So it's all part of our continuous learning, and we are determined to improve, and the software that Jim's just described is helping us spot these issues, and yes, we are trying to learn. And so once again, we'd be expecting to reduce the number of duplicate payments and ultimately eliminate them. And I think it'd be a useful area for the audit committee to sort of look back on next time the internal audit report comes through.
With that in mind, Rupert, with what Aidan has just said, can you highlight to us in a forthcoming report not just the figures, but the actual percentages, so that we as a committee can be assured that things are moving in the right direction? Is that possible, please?
Yes, absolutely, Chair. And I would probably say on this, there's probably a slight time lag in that the AP forensic software came in relatively recently, but it's sort of a backwards look at the data. So again, I'd hope that there'd be, once that's sort of fully embedded, that there'd be a far reduced number coming through. But yes, certainly we'll provide percentages to help with that context.
Brilliant, thank you. Next question is from Councillor Richard Biggs.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Sutton couldn't find anything nitpicking, so I've got one. So just on page 26, we put kindly pointed out the difference between partial and limited. And clearly at the top of there, we've got partial because that's in the previous reporting period and when the SIPFA rules were different, and that's fully understood. I'm just wondering, any other member of the public wouldn't necessarily know that, and it might be confusing, particularly as literally just above that is an explanation of limited. So I think all that's required, I think, is just something at the end of that description brackets to say what partial meant as being the same thing. That was all really. Thank you.
You okay with that, Rupert?
Yes, definitely, and apologies for any confusion there. Hopefully by next report there shouldn't be any sort of crossover, if you see what I mean, but completely take that point on board. Thank you.
Just one from me, Rupert, because most of the other committee members have covered my questions. On, I think it's page 8 of your report in the data protection training, it seems to me that it's quite a worryingly low percentage rate of actual training taking place. Are you concerned by that level of training? If so, have you made the necessary recommendations to the council to get its proverbial in gear to make sure that the necessary training is done? Because to me, data protection training should almost be a matter of course.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good question. Yeah, I think yes, we were concerned at the time, and hence probably why we provided the limited opinion. And you'll see that we raised 5 recommendations within that. And I know one of those recommendations was obviously to sort of for the organisation to actively monitor and improve that training rate. Again, I can't recall the exact date of the audit, but I know it was some time ago now, in terms of 6 to 9 months, that was the figure. So I'm hoping that when we do complete a follow-up review, which I'm sure will be shortly, that we hopefully will be able to bring an improved training percentage rate. But no, at the time it was concerning, and hence why we made the recommendations, I think, to hopefully monitor that.
Thank you, Rupert. Mark Eyre, I believe you want to come in on this.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Mark Eyre, I'm the Service Manager for Assurance. Just really following up a little bit on what Rupert has just reported to the committee. So the information compliance is one of the services that sits within my assurance area. So we've got a new data protection module which is about to go live shortly, and both prior to that and once this does go live, there will be sort of further promotion. So certainly looking at the older version, we did up the rates quite significantly from the time that was reported in the audit report. I don't have the actual figures on me, but certainly there was a fairly successful promotional campaign to up that adherence to that training schedule. We've also added this as a ongoing key performance indicator that will get reported back to the senior leadership team. So we'll be able to, at that very top level, be able to monitor that compliance as time goes on. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mark. If you and Rupert can work together on this to make sure that in future the committee is aware of the improvement in figures on this training, I would really appreciate that. Thank you. If that's all the questions from committee members, external committee, we have question, please, from Councillor Darryl Turner.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Darryl Turner. I represent the Lyme Region Charmouth Ward and chair the Place and Resources Overview Committee. 2 issues really. One is very minor, and I just wonder why the transformation area on page 3 has not been started yet. I mean, we based a lot of our savings on transformation, on the initial change to the Unitary Council, and I'd like to just know when that's likely to happen. And the other one, which is more concerning, basically starts on page 15, and it surrounds the transport operator's license. Now, if that license is lost or curtailed, it could have significant impact on this council. SWAP have given it a limited tag, which basically said there are significant gaps, weaknesses, or non-compliance, One of the comments it makes is there's something like 30% of times on inspection is not being carried out on vehicles. That's quite serious. And I wonder what they like to make any further comments on that and the risk to the organisation. And the other thing, if I could, perhaps it might be worth passing on to scrutiny. I don't know if Shane's on board this morning, but scrutiny may want to look at that area because it is a significant risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl. I believe, Aidan, you want to come back on the transformation part.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, we agreed, or we requested internal audit delayed their review of transformation programs, essentially because as the pandemic struck last year, we basically paused transformation to redeploy resources onto COVID response. So the transformation savings that we'd built into the 1920 budget, the 2021 budget, we basically have parked and delayed so we could focus on responding to the pandemic. In November this year, November last year, November 20, we refreshed and reviewed the transformation programme and have relaunched it. So in the budget papers going to Cabinet tomorrow, there's more detail on the savings associated with transformation. So we will be looking for internal audit to refocus and to look at the achievability and the delivery of those transformation savings. It's just the timing was inappropriate last year, so that's why we delayed them.
Did you want to come back on anything on that, Daryl?
No, I'm quite happy with that, Matt. It's just like I said, the real concern was the operator's license. That is my area expertise. I have held an operator's license, and I know the risk to companies if that's not looked after very, very closely. Perhaps, like I said, we maybe have a conversation outside of this and pass that on to Shane, perhaps. Thanks.
Yeah, if you and I could have a discussion about that after the meeting, Daryl, and then we can probably get that moved on to Shane. This might be something that it might be need for a small group to perhaps be working on, or perhaps just for Shane's resources and place scrutiny committee to work on. But perhaps we can have that conversation outside of the meeting. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, certainly, Chairman. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Daryl. As there's no other questions, that was just a reported update for us to review and comment, which we have done. So we now move on to agenda item number 6, and this is over to Mark Eyre and David Trotter, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, everybody. So I'm Mark Eyre, I'm the Council Service Manager for Assurance, and as Chair just mentioned, I'm joined today by David Trotter, and David's our Risk and Resilience Officer. I'll just provide a very brief run through the risk management update this morning. Our Risk and Resilience Officer continues to meet with service areas to update their risks, and in particular, I think it's worth highlighting to committee that there's been quite a lot of reviews, particularly across the children's and adults areas in terms of providing an up-to-date schedule. There are further reviews this week with Place Directorate management teams this week, and I think from memory, I'm pretty sure the operator's license that was just being discussed is included. I can't remember whether it's identified as high within the report or not, but we'll take that up also as well part of those reviews later in this week. I think so. There's quite a lot of progress to actually get those regular updates coming through. There's still some areas where it's not coming through quite as quickly as we'd like to, but we're working on that. But generally, I think pretty comfortable that it's a good flow of updates coming through now. In terms of the actual risk management processes more generally, the committee's actually played quite a key role in enabling the improvement to our risk management process. At previous meetings, there's been a request to move our scoring from the current 3x3 methodology that we use. So for those that aren't aware, that's a score of 1 to 3 for impact, 1 to 3 for likelihood, and to try and move that to a 5x5 model to provide a clearer focus on the most high risk areas. So we'll be looking to phase that in during the next financial year. It's perhaps not moved forward quite as fast as we'd like to, mainly because the Risk and Resilience Officer, as well as providing the risk management role, excuse me, is also supporting the emergency planning team in the COVID-19 response. Other areas that we're looking at in terms of that moving risk management forward, we're looking to implement the manager view on the effectiveness of controls. It's there in some areas, but needs to be embedded fully across the process. A bit of work to start getting a new risk management training package in place. So since the last presentation to the committee, you'll see that there's quite a lot of schedules of the individual high risks across the different directorates. There's just been one risk added to the risk register that constitutes high since we last came to the committee, and that's in the adult schedule. It's risk 298 and it's on page 41 of your papers, and that relates to support to adult social care providers, including those whom the local authority does not have a contract, to reduce the rate of COVID-19 transmission. There's quite a detailed management response to this in the document, as there is for all high risks. And that was really all I was going to do in terms of running through the papers, Chair, if I may, but if I could.
You're breaking up a bit there, Mark. Members, if you've got any questions, if you could put RTS in at the side, that would be great. A couple of questions from myself, Mark. On page 56, there is the talk about the replacement of the system for the trapeze by November 2020. We're obviously in January 21. Do we have that replacement, or do we have a new date for when that replacement will come in?
I can certainly provide an update on that one, Chair, because this was a risk you raised previously to me, so I've managed to liaise with the risk owner in advance of today. So the feedback from the risk owner is that they do see that replacement system as a key service efficiency priority for Dorset Travel, so it's not yet in place. A 6-monthly contract extension's been achieved, and it's being aligned to trying to align the procurement for that alongside the transformation programme that's underway, or will shortly be underway for the service. So a business case for that is in development. I don't have a revised date for that, but that's the current status of that risk.
If you could get me a revised date at some point, I would appreciate that. Then on page 58, I think is the licensing issue which Councillor Darryl Turner was referring to. So I presume you're aware of that, yes?
Certainly, I was aware that it had been included on there previously, so I can see it's in the report now. We can provide, we're actually straight after this meeting, we're due to go into a meeting with the place-based services, so we'll be picking up all of the various high risks that I've identified within that report as part of that session.
As a suggestion, Mark, could you arrange a meeting between yourself, Councillor Turner, myself and Councillor Shane Bartlett for us to have a bit of a discussion as to how we take this forward?
Certainly can, Chair, will do.
Brilliant, thank you. The other question, which also refers to page 58, when we're talking about the PURE system, do you feel that as a council we're getting to grips with this? Do you feel that we're on track to get it sorted and that everybody understands quite what the expectations are?
Chair, if I may, I would probably have to refer that back to get that view from the risk owner. As I say, the stage that we're looking for further implementation across our risk process is getting that manager verification of the effectiveness of those controls, which then SWAP as part of the internal audit process can sort of sense check and challenge. So I'm not sure whether with this particular risk whether we've got that yet. I'd have to report that back through outside of the meeting if I may. But again, it's another place-based services one, so we can have that conversation in the meeting that follows this one with place-based services.
If you could, yeah. And sorry, and finally, this is something that I've had a bit of an issue with for a number of times and a number of months now. I think it's from page 61 to 138, which talks about health and safety reports. It's concerned me for quite a while that councillors don't seem to ever see any of these health and safety reports. And I just wonder whether that is something through your area where you could give elected members a little bit of assurance on this? Is that something that you could perhaps incorporate into reporting at a later date?
I don't see a problem with that, Chair. I mean, health and safety falls outside of my service area, but I can certainly liaise with the health and safety team to see whether we could build something into the future risk management reports. I guess it's, in many ways, a lot of this sort of focuses on some of the more strategic risk elements, but there are more operational risks, such as health and safety ones, that we could incorporate within. So happy to take that away and have a look at that for you.
Yeah, if you could, that would be great. That's it from me. Right, the first question comes from Councillor Richard Biggs.
Thank you, Chair. It's an excellent document. I'm really pleased that risk management has been taken very seriously. There's some really good thought gone into it. And I'm glad at long last, you know, we're still talking about changing this matrix, but it seems to be taking forever to do that. I understand the reasons for it. I think an example would be, if we're looking at the overall weight of risk on the authority, if we look at the page 37 on the top right hand corner, we got the sort of breakdown there. And you will see, just wait till the page scrolls down. Yeah, so looking at the top right hand columns there, you've got 50 risks which are in the medium category, and that actually is between 40 and 60% probability, so more likely to occur, most of them, than not. And being a medium impact as well, they're quite serious impacts. So just focusing on sort of reporting, talking about the top risks is perhaps a little bit false sense of security. The other thing with that weighting is also, if you look at the low probability high impact risks, there's 51. Well, obviously, you know, the depot fire at Chickwell would certainly been in that category because we self-insured. We've had to foot the bill. So the impact has fallen directly on the authority rather than being transferred via an insurance. So I would hope, I suspect it's not, but wherever we are self-insuring, we should have a risk on the risk register. I don't know if that's occurring, but that really needs to look at, because if you start aggregating all those risks up, I know, you know, it's a low probability of that occurring, but they do from time to time. And if we've got sort of 50 odd significant items that we self-insure, which go into the millions, that's something that we need to think about. I just wonder if you could answer that specific point, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Biggs. In terms of the insurance side, I don't believe it actually is in there at the moment, so that it's probably something we need to look at building in something around the council's risk financing strategy. In terms of the wider issue about the matrices, and first of all, thanks very much for the positive comments on the report. Really appreciate that, and I know David's put a lot of time in trying to sort of really bring a lot of this to life. So we will be looking to roll out that 5x5 from the 1st of April. I think, like I mentioned to previous committees, the original idea with the current scoring and accepting the limitations of it was really to try and get that early buy-in from managers. And I think hopefully what the report does show is that we are now getting some really good buy-in in terms of those updates. So I think hopefully that was the right original approach, but certainly accept the comments you raised about really being able to differentiate and understand those risks more with the alternative scoring.
David Trotter, I think you want to come back in on this as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. I'm David Trotter, Risk and Resilience Officer. Taking on all the committee's comments at previous meetings with regards to a 5x5 matrix, and totally agree with Councillor Biggs. What we've actually produced mock-up reports using a 5x5 matrix if we shared with some stakeholders, and it seems to have gone down quite well. We've already prepared a revised policy and strategy, and we've pulled together a training package which we'd hope to be incorporated within the learning portal, which we shared with members and officers. So we're conscious that, and we have developed it, we've moved things on quite a lot, but I'm trying to give assurance that we are aiming to get this in place for the next financial year. But I hope that sort of gives some assurance. Thanks.
Are you okay with that, Richard?
Yeah, look forward to that. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Next question from Councillor Claire Sutton.
Thank you, Matt. I've got 3 areas, so I'll do them one at a time if that suits you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. First of all, and apologies to Mark, because Mark, you did ask us to alert you if there were particular areas of risk, you know, so you could get the right people on the call. So apologies if the right people aren't here to answer my questions. That's fine. You know, get back to that. So first of all, on children's services, in the overall analysis, it says it was requested that closer links were enabled between the risk and performance measures. Now, whilst I have no desire to put even further pressure on frontline managers, heads of service, directors, an increased burden of reporting. Looking at some of the highest risks in children's, obviously there's a narrative about how they're being mitigated in terms of the steps that are being taken. So that's effectively, so I was thinking of it in the language of outputs and outcomes, but I'm not seeing the outcomes. So I guess what I mean by that is I'm not seeing the performance measures. So for example, children in care, it's described that there's an ongoing campaign to recruit foster carers and also the foster parent group, which is all great, but it's not visible to us whether those mitigation measures are actually achieving the desired aim. So you can't see movement. You can read what we're doing to mitigate, but you can't see if it's working. And then a second example would be, this is a more positive one, the sustained increase in the number and quality of permanent appointments. So that's the next one down. So in that one, the fact that it's not quantified, but the fact that there's a sustained increase in permanent appointments is an outcome that effectively shows us that the steps that are being taken are working. So that's an overarching question, which actually overarches the whole document about how you can assess whether the mitigation measures are working and whether we're going in the right direction. So I think that's almost like a philosophical thing that has to be considered in the overall piece, but in the context of the fact we don't want to place even greater demands on very, very overstretched staff. So I think I'll probably just throw that in there for now as something to think about, unless anyone wants to comment on that at this moment in time.
Jed, can I come in briefly on
yes,
that?
Of course, yeah.
I mean, one of the things that, although we don't actually include the detail in the report, it sits in the risk register itself.
Yeah.
That does actually record on there whether there's any level of movement within
Sure,
that risk,
yeah.
so whether it's an improving or worsening risk. So that is possibly something we could look to embed within the risk document more generally. I think the other point about the sort of specific performance measures, that's perhaps something, it's a really good point. It's perhaps something we could take away as a more general comment for risk owners to think about when they're actually pulling together their management response, I think.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm not going to go to the trouble of trying to scroll through the document because it's just so difficult. So I've got another 2. Another one is on page 57. It's about our failure to adapt services and communities to the impacts of a changing climate, and there's a very frank acknowledgement that nothing much has been done out with two directorates. So whilst obviously we've got this strategy which deals almost exclusively with climate change mitigation, what this failure, well, what this element here is telling us that we're lagging in adaptation. So this might not be a question for you, Mark, but I suppose I'd like some reassurance that this is in the mix somewhere. And secondly, there's one sentence in there which gives one pause for concern, which it talks about delivering a seminar, an aspiration to deliver a mitigation seminar in early 2018, which is obviously a typo, but makes you think we're a little bit behind the curve potentially on adaptation.
Jay, can I, if we can take that one away perhaps and go back to the risk owner for a more thorough update on that, and perhaps we highlight that in the next risk management report, if I may.
That would be great.
I think, Mark, one of the things that is coming from the issues which are being raised by Councillor Sutton is, when perhaps you and David produce these reports, if there is further details in the background which are available to councillors to look at, to judge, to research, to analyse, perhaps some links could be put in.
I think they're already there, Chair. At the beginning of the report, there should be links to the actual risk register itself, which enables people to enable members and officers to be able to delve into the actual detail behind it. I think also, and David Trotter will be able to correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think the actual links in the actual report itself, where you've got the blue writing for the community and public protection in the second risk on here, if you click on that, that will take you into the detail of the risk as well, I think.
Right, it was that bit that I didn't know. I knew that the start had links, and I was just about to say, but we could do with links for the specific areas. But if that actually does that, David, can you oh yeah, he's confirmed that that's correct. Brilliant, thank you. Third question, Claire.
Thank you. This one's more service specific, so again might not be answerable here. It's about the Adults Directorate. So one, the review of high cost packages, and obviously with huge pressures on services, obviously high cost packages need to be reviewed, but obviously, you know, that colleagues within adults will be acutely aware that actually in reviewing high cost packages, you know, the aim there will be to reduce those packages, which could lead into further risks in relation to those individuals whose packages are being produced. The second one is a question that there's a suggestion that the collection rate for service user contributions might drop as a result of COVID, and to be honest, that just surprised me, because obviously we're aware of certain sectors of society where, you know, there are real income risks in the working age population in particular, and in families, but I wasn't quite sure why older people in receipt of care, whilst there's obviously lots of health and well-being consequences, why their material circumstances would reduce in such a way that their contributions towards the care they receive might be impacted upon. But that might not be a question for you, Mark. I realise that.
And I certainly wouldn't have the answers on the answers to certain, but I'm happy to take that away. And what I'm not sure is whether there's any other officers on the line that may potentially have an answer to that. But if not, I'm happy to take that away.
I'm just wondering whether Aidan or Jim, you've got any points that you could raise to help there.
I'm trying to think through myself. Jill's here on the line. Jill, can I ask you to comment?
Jill, you're on mute.
Is that better?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Hello, Jill Vickers, Interim Corporate Director of Adult Social Care. Yes, partly this is to do with not all of our service users are older people, so a lot of our very expensive packages are around working age adults. But I suppose the most important thing to say here is most people, not all, but most people who pay something towards their care will have been impacted by COVID in one way or another. So it's just a fact that we have to be really careful that we're not creating a bigger problem by getting income back from people. So it's about that, doing those extra checks really to see whether people have lost income through that. So I hope that answers that question. Thank you, Jill. Claire, did you want to come back on any of that?
No, that's fine. Thanks very much. Thank you.
As I don't see any other questions coming through, that was an agenda item just to note and to comment on. There's nothing to vote, so thank you all very much. Agenda item number 7 is a verbal update on the external audit, and I suppose you could say why we haven't had the accounts to sign yet. So I think this is over to Aidan, Jim and Ian House from Deloitte, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I could start, it's Aidan Dunn, Exec Director of Corporate Development. So just a quick recap. At our last meeting on the 16th of November, you as a committee received the accounts covering the period April 19 to March 20. So the accounts were completed in draft, and Deloitte, our appointed external auditor, were undertaking the audit audit of those accounts, aiming to complete the audit by the end of November. As a committee, you delegated authority to the chairman and to myself to approve and sign the accounts once the audit was concluded, although to come back to this committee if there were any changes on grounds of materiality. So by way of an update, as you've just said in the introduction, we haven't exercised that delegation yet because the external audit is continuing. It's similar in many local authorities across the country, but we thought it would be opportune to hear from our audit lead, Ian Howes from Deloitte, to give you as a committee an update on how the external audit is progressing. So if I may, and hopefully Ian's on the call, if we could hand over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Aidan. Good morning, councillors. It's Ian Howes from External Audit Deloitte. I'm the partner responsible for the audit. As you said, we were very hopeful when we spoke to you last that we would complete the audit by the end of November. A number of questions arose as I was doing the final review of the accounts that have meant we have some work still ongoing. Because we missed the deadline, obviously, we didn't have staff booked then to clear some of those queries. So we are working through the processes now. I'm optimistic by the middle of February we will have completed those. There is one query which is resulting in a number of changes to the accounts in relation to the collection fund, which we're working through with officers at the moment. I would stress that officers are not the cause of the delay. It is in terms of just completing the audit and going through the processes we need. One of the key members of the team did contract COVID, which has also impacted on our timelines as we've worked through the processes. So apologies, as Aidan said, only 37% of council audits were completed by the end of November, as all auditors are having some difficulty in completing audits in the remote environment that we're working in. A similar situation occurred with the NHS audits earlier in the year. So we are working through those things. There is nothing that I have huge concerns that I wish to bring to your attention. Just ask for your continuing patience as we work through the final processes of completing that audit, and we'll get it done as soon as we can.
So Ian, you're hopeful of a February completion. How certain are you? We obviously have a meeting in February. Will you be ready for that meeting?
I'm not certain on the date of that at the moment, Chair, but we'll do our best. I mean, unfortunately, what happens with these things is that if we're working through the process and we find an issue, they can sometimes take some time to unpick, and it's very difficult to know whether they will come up or not. I would envisage we've gone through everything in enough detail that there shouldn't be those issues, but as with the collection fund one, it was a final query from me on an analytical procedure where I said I just don't understand these numbers, that led us all to look into more detail around exactly what had happened with the way in which the collection fund was being accounted for. So, we will do our best, Chair, but I can't guarantee it.
The date for your reference, Ian, is the 22nd of February.
Well, that fits with what I'm working towards, Chair. So we'll see. Hopefully that will be achievable.
Good. Aidan, do you got any more comments to make with regards to the points raised by Ian?
No, that's a helpful update, and I think the collection fund, it's particularly as a new authority in its first year, it's really important that we do get the collection fund right, because it's sort of the bedrock of everything we do. So the extra time will hopefully improve us for future years. So that's fine. I think it'd just be reassuring if we could once again reiterate for the committee that, Ian, have you got everything you need from Dorset Council, and it's a matter of you kind of working through the detail now? Is there anything of concern for the audit committee to hear at this stage? At this stage, I appreciate until it's signed off, it's not complete.
Thank you, Aidan. There's one working paper just being prepared in relation to the collection fund. Again, nothing I've seen at the moment impacts on sort of council tax collection amounts or your budget as such. They're more balance sheet entries that we're looking at. I had a revised set of accounts on Friday, and just the final working paper explaining the adjustments that have been made is expected early this week. So that's the only thing that I'm aware of. We're waiting for the council to produce. As you say, it is with us now to work through those things. any final queries we might have in relation to them, and finalise the audit.
Is there any other questions from committee members? I'll take the silence and the lack of RTS as a no. Thank you very much, Ian, for the update, and we look forward to seeing you in February with a completed set of accounts.
Me too, Chair.
Thank you very much, and thank
you.
you, Aidan. Right then, we now move on to agenda item number 8, which is a short briefing by Mark Payne on council tax. We thought as a committee, with a number of new councillors, that it might be quite good as a sort of training thing and information providing for you to have some information on council tax, etc. I believe the presentation is about 10 to 15 minutes, and there is time for a question and answer session at the end. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. My PC is just, the fan's just started firing up, so you may hear a noise in the background. It is a fan, it's not anything else. I'm sure it all will be fine. Hi everyone, my name is Mark Payne and I'm from the Revs and Bens team. I'm here to give you an overview of the process of how we set the council tax each year. I'm not really intending to go into detail about how the Revs and Bens team administer particular discounts, exemptions or council tax, but there will be an opportunity at the end for questions, and hopefully you'll find this of some use. So please, could I have the slide number 2, please? Okay, so to begin with, just a very high level, what is council tax? So council tax is local taxation in respect of domestic properties, and it's been around since 1993, so it's quite an old, well-established tax now. Every domestic property is assigned a band. There's 8 bands, A to H, which are based on 1991 valuations. I'll talk about the valuation date a little bit later on during the presentation, but I think it's important to realise that the valuations are all quite old at the moment. So the valuation list, that's actually administered and set up by the Valuation Office Agency. So that's central government agency. They provide a list of all the properties and allocate a band, and we reconcile that, as in Dorset Council reconciles that to our Dorset Council systems. So Dorset Council administers the liability and subsequent discounts, exemptions and reliefs and council tax support awards. But we also do refer properties to the Valuation Office Agency to be entered or removed into the list. Obviously, we know what's going on regarding things like planning, building control and so on. So that's important data which we feed into the Valuation Office Agency. So if we move to the next slide, please. OK, so now who collects the council tax? So we collect the council tax. Dorset Council collects the council tax on behalf of us itself and what are called the major precepting authorities. So the major precepting authorities are Dorset Police and Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service. So we are the main preceptors. We then have what's called other precepting authorities, which are the town and parish councils. So essentially the main difference between majors and other preceptors are that the major preceptors get a share of the collection fund surplus and deficit, whereas the town and parish councils don't. So essentially what that means is the towns and parish councils aren't subjective to the risks and rewards that council tax collection can create. So if we go on to slide number 4, and I'll talk about the collection fund and the accounting process. So each precepting authority, i.e. Dorset Council, Dorset Police and Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service, they all set a council tax which makes up the total payable by the customers. So what that means is that, for example, for a Bandsby property, the Dorset Council amount, the police amount and the fire amount will be the same, But because we have lots of towns and parishes, their chunk, they're part of the building blocks that make up the tax will differ. So that means that a lot of people across the area will pay different amounts. So you won't pay the same amount of council tax in the same parishes, because the parish and towns charge, or some of them don't charge anything, some of them don't raise a precept, but there will be different amounts. Dorset Council's what's called in the legislation is the billing authority. So we send the bills and customers pay us. So we send out the demands and we receive the money in, and we have to account for that separately. So that money is accounted for in the collection fund. We're essentially an agent for others and ourselves to collect money. So it's separate to other councils' funds. Dorset Council then makes payments on a monthly basis to the major preceptors to make sure they get their money and they have their cash flow. And towns and parishes, they get theirs twice a year, generally speaking, because they're going to be lower amounts. There's also a separate collection fund for business rates, because we act as a billing authority for business rates as well. Business rates doesn't have towns and parish involvement, they're not impacted by towns by business rates, and also the police aren't impacted by business rates either. But central government are, so it's slightly different, but we have, like I said, we have two funds. So we move on to the next slide, number 5. I'll give you a high level idea of how we actually work out the council tax. There's quite a bit on this slide and it's not the most straightforward process, but I'll give it a crack and try to explain how it works to you. So as I've said, each dwelling is allocated into one of 8 bands coded A to H, A being the lowest, H being the highest. I'll talk about the valuations and how that all works on a later slide. The value given is assumed capital value as at the 1st of April 1991. So if you have a newly constructed property after the 1st of April 1991, that's assigned a nominal 1991 value. Each local authority sets a tax rate, and that's expressed as an annual levy on the Band D property inhabited by 2 liable adults. This decision automatically sets the amounts levied on all types of households and dwellings, and that will become a bit more apparent when I get to a few slides time where I talk about the different ratios between the bands. So a nominal Band D property total is calculated by adding together the number of properties in each band and multiplying by the band ratio. So what that means, to give an example, is 100 Band D properties will count as 100 nominal Band D. Sorry, 100 properties will count as 100 nominal Band D properties, whereas 100 Band C properties, i.e. the band lower, will only count as 89 nominal band properties. That's where it gets a little bit complicated, and I'm hoping a slide a little bit later on will explain that in more detail. Each collecting authority then adds together all the Band D amounts for their area, and we then get a Band D council tax bill. So that's what we talk about, our Band D council tax. To calculate the council tax for a particular property, a ratio is then applied. So a Band D property will pay the full amount. A Band H property, the highest band, will pay twice that of a Band D, and a Band H will pay 3 times of a Band A. So again, this will become clearer when I show the ratios. If we look at the next slide, that talks about the council tax base for Dorset Council. So the council tax base is the measure of relative taxable capacity of the authority's area, i.e. how many Band D properties we have. So the tax base represents a full year equivalent of chargeable dwellings from the authority's area. So the law says we must express that as an equivalent number of Band D dwellings. Now in October each year, we have to submit this information to government. They want to know how many Band D properties we have. So we've got a form, which the form's actually online if you want to look at that, and you can compare us to every other council. But to give you a snapshot of what we did in October, when we completed the CTB1 form, council tax base form, is we can see how many domestic properties we've got, so how many actual properties we've got in Dorset, and then you'll see there's 180,349. When we apply the band D calculation to that, the ratio, that turns out to be 181,071 properties. So there's an increase. However, what we then do, and what I haven't done here because the process is quite complex, is we then need to take off anything that factors in discounts, reliefs, exemptions and council tax support, and that's where the number comes down. So this form that we complete every October only provides the total for Dorset Council area. A bit later on in the year, in December, we actually do that on a more granular basis and we work it out on a parish base. And when we do that on a parish and town base, then what will happen is we can then give that to the towns and parish councils, and they can work out what the changes in their tax base and work out their council tax charge. So we move to the next slide, please. So in December, we calculate the tax base for each parish and subsequently overall. To do this, it takes quite a few steps, given that we've got so many parishes. And how we do that is we take the actual discounts, exemptions and council tax support that are applied to the property at a point in time, and that point in time is set in legislation as being the 30th of November. So when we apply discounts, exemptions and council tax support, we thus reduce the number of actual properties. Then we convert all our totals to band D equivalents, and by doing that we apply a proportion based on 9 to each band, and the next slide will show you those proportions. So the band D equivalents as at the 30th November 2020, i.e. for this year's council tax setting, after we've taken into account all discounts, exemptions and council tax support, turned out to be 151,346.2. We round that to 1 decimal place because the law says so, because I don't know why we do it to 1, but we do. We then apply a collection rate and a growth rate. The collection rate is deemed as being 98%, and therefore that comes at 148,319.7 properties. We haven't applied a growth factor this year because we don't feel that there will be any growth in the tax base because of the current economic situation. But obviously, you know, well, I can go on to what happens if there's growth or shrinkage in the tax base in a later slide. If we move to the next slide, this gives us the band ratios that I mentioned earlier. You'll see it's quite small, but you'll see that it's based on ninths. So a band D is 9 ninths, a band A being 6 ninths, and a band H being 18 ninths. So as I said earlier, a band H would pay twice a band D, 3 times a band A. This slide also gives you the valuations of the properties, and you'll note they are quite outdated, the highest property value being over 320,000. But what you have to remember is the valuation office agency, they don't attribute an actual valuation to the property. So the house I live in isn't given a specific value, it's given a banding. So if a property is built in 2021, the VOA would compare a new build to a property that's already banded, and effectively it should all be relative. The fact that we're now looking at, in April, 30 years since the original valuation date does undermine the tax slightly. I think the original plan was to revalue every 5 years, similar to business rates, but for one reason or another that revaluation hasn't taken place. Okay, so if we move to the next slide, slide 9, this talks about tax base growth and shrinkage, which I touched on earlier. So of course, year on year we see changes in the tax base, things change during the year. So the tax base can grow or shrink in a number of ways. Growth can be generated, or the most obvious growth would be new properties being built, but that can be tempered by properties being removed from the list, which could be because they're being demolished. It could be because somebody has appealed their banding, so their band has gone down. It could be because the property is now business rated, it's now a business, therefore wouldn't be in the list. for council tax, but we would be in a separate list, which is going to include all the business rates properties. And it also takes into account discounts, exemptions and council tax support being awarded. So if you have an increase in any of those, then the tax base will go down. Conversely, if fewer people claim discounts, exemptions or council tax support, then the tax base will go up, or that will be a factor for it going up. In 2020-21, we've seen a significant increase in customers claiming council tax support, which is probably of no surprise. We've also seen some increases in certain exemptions as well, and therefore that's why we've looked a nil growth, because we don't really expect that to get any better for a little while. An assumed collection rate is incorporated into the calculations, and we've given 98% for 21-22, and that's based on the last full year's actual collection rate. Now 98% for 19-20 is what we collected in year. You would generally collect a bit of money outside of the year in which it's due, but obviously because of COVID, then we anticipate that we will have an increase in our arrears, and we've seen that we've seen a drop in our cash flow. So we've taken a punt that 98% for a in-year plus payments that have been made after the year should work for us. Growth in tax space means more properties to collect from. Conversely, shrinkage means that in the tax space means there's fewer properties to collect the council tax from. I think the point I need to get across here is just because a parish or town council area may have lots of new houses built, if they're occupied by people claiming reductions, exemptions, there will be little or no growth. If a new Band D property is built, if it's occupied by somebody who is exempt, there is no growth for that property being built. And obviously COVID, as you'd expect, has seen a lot more customers claiming supports. When I did the council tax base form in October, apart from seeing an increase in council tax support, which we all knew would happen, we also saw an increase in exempt properties which were left empty by people who had passed away. Now, I don't think they all passed away because of COVID, but I think what happened is these properties weren't reoccupied because of the lockdown situation, and I'm aware of properties near me whereby the occupant passed on and they've just been sat empty and for some time because the family have lived away. So we've seen an increase in those types of exemptions as well. And obviously we've seen a bit of a downturn in people moving house, particularly during lockdown 1, although I'm not sure what the market's like now, but during the year we did see a drop in movement. We also saw an increase in people claiming single person discounts compared to the year before. We're not sure why that is, but that is a pattern which is replicated in neighbouring areas, and you know, like I said, we're not sure why, but it's not a pattern that makes us an outlier compared to other authorities, but that might be an area that we might want to look at in the future. So if we move on to the next slide, that talks a bit more about setting the council tax. So council tax is set based on the position as at the 30th of November, as I've said. The tax base for each town and parish is calculated and shared with those precepting authorities, and they then set their part of the tax. So at the moment, the council tax for the major preceptors, i.e. ourselves, police and fire, can only be increased by up to 2% before a referendum is triggered. This doesn't apply to the town or parish charge, who can increase more than 2%. On top of the 2%, we are allowed up to 3% increase for the adult social care precept, and that increased from 2% a year ago. So essentially, what that allows us is to give a 5% increase overall in council tax. I talked earlier about we've set a 98% collection rate. We do that every year. We set a growth rate. What that means is there can be surpluses and deficits on the collection fund. As I mentioned, those risks and rewards are met by the preceptors, Dorset Council, Police and the Fire. And like I said, that reduces the risk for towns and parishes, so they're not impacted by potential deficits in the year in question. If we move on to the next slide, please. Precepting authorities provide their council tax requirement to Dorset Council by the end of January each year. The law actually allows us to set the council tax. We have to set it by the 11th of March, and that applies to all of the precepting, both major and other, and ourselves. Obviously, if we did that, then we would delay sending out our council tax bills. So we asked the towns and parishes and the other preceptors to provide us information about setting their council tax by the end of January. So that allows us to know what the full charge will be in a resolution for ourselves to set it in February. So that means pretty much the day that that decision is made by Dorset Council, our Redmond Ben's team are then producing the bills for Dorset Council customers. They will have an issue date for March and allow an April instalment. Where we don't want to be is having a delayed instalment date because that will severely impact our cash flow. So without the support of the towns and parishes, that could that could really jeopardise us getting the bills out on time. And actually, it would only need one town or parish to not comply would delay the process for everyone, because the system that we produces it for the whole of the area. So that's a really important thing, and also just to sort of publicly say thanks to the precepting authorities for getting that to us every year. Like I said, it's a well-established process, but you know, there's still a fair bit of work trying to get together what is over 200 different precepting authorities to get that information to us. So if we do move to slide 12, finally what this gives us is the Dorset Council proposed charges, or what we propose. When precepting authority charges are added to the Dorset Council charge, the police and fire element and the Dorset Council element will be consistent across each area. So for example, a band D across the whole of Dorset will pay the same in terms of that part, but it's when you have the town or parish precept to add on top of that that it actually differs the council tax. What that does mean is that it's sometimes difficult for us to explain to customers, well, not difficult, but customers will query, why am I living in parish whatever, parish A, paying more than my brother who lives in parish B? And that's generally down to the difference in town and parish charges. So what you also see here is, if you look on the proposed charges, you'll see the band D amount of 1,779.39. Then if you look at all the other figures, they are worked out by the ratio. So for example, band H is 18/9, band A is 6/9. So that concludes what I've got to say about setting the council tax. Hopefully you found that useful. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please let me know, and we'll do our best to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. A really good presentation. A couple of points from myself. Could you work with perhaps Susan and get the slides out to all elected members? I appreciate this meeting is recorded, but members might not want to go through an hour or so's meeting to get to your slides. And I just think, as we've got a number of new councillors across the council, it would be a very helpful thing to do. Just a point of clarification, the 98% collection rate, now when that comes to town and parish councils, do they get 98% of what they've asked for, or do they get 100% of what they've asked for?
They get all of what they ask for. However, their base is tempered by the base is given at 98% of the actual base, if that makes sense. So they're told this is how many properties there are after we've taken into a factor growth and collection rate. Right. We don't change that collection rate between different parishes. We apply the collection rate across the whole of Dorset, although clearly there's pockets of Dorset which may have a different collection rate if you went to that granular data, but we don't actually hold that data. We look at the picture.
Brilliant, thank you, Mark. First question I think is from Councillor Bill Pipe.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mark, for a very good and really quite thorough presentation. I've got a query over the aggregate 98% collection rate, which I think is quite optimistic. You know, as COVID carries on and jobs disappear, I would expect the collection rate to be lower than the forecast 98%. How sure are you that we can actually achieve 98%, particularly when the shortfall is, I suspect, likely to be in bands A to D?
It's always a bit of a guesswork. You can never predict it. What I would say is that if people are suffering, i.e. they lose their jobs and whatever, they will generally be entitled to council tax support, in which case that will reduce the amount of council tax that they have to pay. We don't know. However, the other thing as well is that government are expecting us to take recovery action against customers that don't pay, and someone that doesn't pay in 2021, we can come to arrangements to pay that in future years. It may take some time for us to recover that money, but the hope is that we will collect that over time.
Okay, so if somebody can't pay their council tax, and you put them on a plan, let's say, to pay at a reduced rate, what does that then take itself out of that 98% collection rate, or does the new figure stay there?
No, the 98%.
What I'm trying to say.
The 98% collection rate is, we're saying we will collect 98% of the council tax that we raise in 2021, isn't it? Yeah, 2021. When we collect that is a different matter. So it may be that we don't collect that within year, and it's unlikely that we will collect that within year. Generally speaking, in year we do collect about 98%, and then we collect more money as time goes on. So if we set an arrangement for someone outside of the year, yes, it is included in that 98%, albeit that 98% will take longer to collect.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Bill. Next question from Councillor Claire Sutton.
Thank you, Matt. Mark, just to make sure I properly understood what you said. So basically, where council tax goes unpaid, that liability effectively falls exclusively on Dorset Council. Is that correct? So no. I got that wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
So it falls equally on all preceptors.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think you need to get away. The fact that we are a preceptor and we're collecting the money, we've got two hats. We are an agent, and certainly when it comes to accounting, you've got to get that mindset, because we collect so much money, around about 80% is ours, and so that's why the collection fund is separate, and that's why the collection fund isn't part of our funds, if you like. It's shown separately in the accounts.
Okay, so the follow-up question is, in areas that are relatively poorer, so where there's more likely to be underpayment, so for example, arguably, possibly Weymouth and Portland, the shortfall in, say, Weymouth and Portland will fall equally on the police and on Dorset Council, but will fall disproportionately on Weymouth Town Council and Portland Town Council, as opposed to Bridport Town Council. Would that be right?
Yeah, we wouldn't look at collection rates for specific areas. It will be equal for everyone. We know that there are pockets of the Dorset Council area. We know because we were previously 5 districts and boroughs, and we know which one had the higher or lower rates. Effectively, that has been levelled out by becoming Dorset Council.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, if I could just follow on just for a point of clarity there. I thought that town and parish councils weren't affected by collection rates in terms of what precept they get paid.
No, they're not. No, they're not. No.
Thank you. Any other questions from members? Don't think so. Thank you very much, Mark. That was really, really helpful, and appreciate your time with that. Thank you.
No problem, Chair. If anyone does have any queries, drop me an email and I'll do my best to answer them or point them in the right direction.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Right, so we move on to agenda item number 9, which is over to Richard Ironside. This is a briefing on the Redmond review.
Thank you, Chairman, councillors, and good morning, everybody. I'm Richard Ironside, as you say. I'm in the finance team. This briefing on the Redmond review on the effectiveness of local audit accountability to the public is for this committee to be aware of the content of the review and provides an opportunity to discuss whether individual councils can learn from or make change to their audit process. Next slide, please. I've tried to cover a lot of information in this briefing today, which includes a background to changes to local government auditor appointments leading to the Redmond review by Sir Tony Redmond, a response to the Redmond review by public sector auditor appointments, the PSAA, a response from the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, the MHCLG, some initial observations from the Dorset Council Finance Team perspective, and a summary of this presentation with an opportunity for questions and discussion. I've also added a list of acronyms at the end, there are a few of those, and links to the Redmond review, the Public Sector Auditor Appointments response, and the MHCLG response, which I can make available to any councillors that wish to look in more detail at those documents. Next slide, please. Some time why the Redmond review was requested. The audit framework and auditor appointment process were changed with the Local Audit and Accountability Act 2014 and were previously managed through the Audit Commission, which was abolished in March 2015. All predecessor councils of Dorset Council opted into the public sector-led procurement process led by public sector auditor appointments, rather than running their own processes and creating their own audit panels, which would then have to be resourced and serviced. And from the information, PSAA is the appointed body for 98% of local authority audits. Deloitte were appointed as external auditors for all the predecessor councils, and Deloitte have continued as auditors for Dorset Council upon local government reorganisation in Dorset. The Redmond review was undertaken at the request of the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, and the following slides summarise the Redmond review, responses to that review from public sector auditor appointments and their advisory panel, and by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, as well as interpretation from colleagues in the Society of County Treasurers, the SCT. Next slide, please. The Redmond review was published on the 8th of September 2020 by the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. The objective of the Redmond review was to determine whether audit framework in England is operating in line with the intentions of the Act, determine whether reforms have resulted in improved effectiveness of the control and governance framework, and transparency of financial information presented by local authorities, determine whether the current statutory framework supports transparent disclosure of financial performance, which can be used to hold local authorities to account, and make recommendations for improvements to the process, products and framework. Next slide, please. In summary, in their response, public sector auditor appointments were encouraged that the Redmond review endorses the need for clear system leadership, recognises that publishing local authority accounts by 31st of July isn't sustainable, acknowledges that the public audit market is fragile due to a limited number of suppliers and wider pressures on those firms, recognises current audit fees are low compared to other sectors, welcomes the new Code of Audit Practice and new value for money arrangements, recognises limitations on fee setting arrangements, calls for an improved clarity and relevance of local audit reporting, and recognises the need for strength and capacity and skills throughout financial reporting. Next slide, please. The public sector auditor appointments response also observes that the review draws attention to challenges in the local audit system, including regulatory requirements, recruitment and retention of staff, and from the COVID-19 pandemic. The PSAA want to help with the recommendations as it sees the current system as under-resourced, undervalued and not having much impact. Finally, the PSAA is apprehensive about legislating for the new Office of Local Audit Regulation, the OLAR, which would have key responsibilities as shown on the slide, including local auditor appointments and managing, monitoring and regulating the process of local audit sector. Next slide, please. The response from the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government was issued on 17th of December 2020, within the timescale as requested by the Public Accounts Committee. The MHCLG found that the Redmond review highlighted 3 key problems. Current local audit arrangements do not meet objectives of the Local Audit and Accountability Act 2014, market fragility, with local audit being an unattractive market, and absence of system leadership with roles and responsibilities spread over multiple organisations. The MHCLG response to the recommendations in the review was grouped into 5 themes, which are expanded on in the next few slides. Relevant local authorities affected will receive a share of 15 million additional funding in 2021-22 to support these recommendations, including for any increase in audit fees and production of the new standard statements, which are referred to in subsequent slides. Allocations for each local authority are as yet to be confirmed. Next slide, please. The recommendations on action to support immediate market stability are all auditors to have the skills and training necessary to audit a local authority. This is also relevant to the context of the 2019 Bryden review into the quality and effectiveness of audit. The current fee structure be revised to ensure adequate audit resources are deployed. Revised statutes such as audit firms with requisite capacity, skills and experience aren't excluded from bidding for local audit work. This was partly agreed, and MHCLG will be working on this, and again this is relevant to the context of the 2019 Bryden review. To extend the deadline to publish accounts to 30th of September, partly agreed, to be reviewed after 2 years, which will cover the accounts for 2020-21 and 2021-22. And consult with National Health Service England, NHS Improvement and the Department of Health and Social Care on revised deadlines for publishing accounts. Next slide, please. The Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government will review all of the recommendations that are on this slide on system leadership options and give a full response this spring. The recommendations are around new regulatory body responsibilities, the Office of Local Audit and Regulation, roles and responsibilities of key stakeholders, governance arrangements through a new liaison committee, audit fees, quality and standards, and sanctions where audit work did not meet those standards. There is also concern that too much time is spent auditing fixed assets and pension valuations, which have no immediate impact on financial resilience, at the expense of focusing on major areas of expenditure and levels of reserves, which would have an impact. Next, changes on implemented in the 2020 Audit Code of Practice in consideration of financial resilience for value for money matters, and MHCLG to review its framework around assurance on financial sustainability. Next slide, please. The recommendation on enhancing the functioning of local audit and the governance for responding to its findings are local councils review governance arrangements, including annual report by the external auditor to full council meetings, appointment of at least one independent member to the audit committee, formalise and facility for the chief executive officer and monitoring officer, the chief financial officer to meet at least annually with the key audit partner. External audit to recognise that internal audit work can be used if consistent with the Code of Audit Practice, strengthening engagement between external and internal staff. Internal audit. External auditor to present an annual report to full council by the 30th of September each year, whether or not the accounts have been certified. And share key concerns on service and financial viability between local auditors and inspectorates such as Ofsted. Next slide, please. The recommendations on improving transparency of local authorities' accounts to the public are a new standard statement of service information and costs compared with the budget. One option for this may be to issue the new standard statement alongside council bills, as from 2022, maybe just a short 1 or 2 sided statement. The new statement will be subject to external audit. Each local authority to consider the best accessible means to communicate on the accounts to the council taxpayers and to service users. Chartered Institute of Public Finance Accountants, CIPFA, and the Local Authority Scotland Accounts Advisory Committee, LASAC, to determine whether there is scope to simplify the content and presentation of accounts, while recognising that the earliest simplification could reasonably be achieved is for the 2022-23 accounts. Next slide, please. This is really just to say there are a number of recommendations in relation to local audit for smaller bodies, which isn't relevant for Dorset Council as it has a turnover in excess of 6.5 million. Next slide, please. These are just a few initial observations from the finance team perspective. An external audit team with requisite knowledge, skills and experience is welcomed and would hopefully bring stability and continuity of audit team members year on year. Additional funding for an increase in audit fees is welcomed if the outcome is achievement of the intended quality and standards of audit work. The extended deadline doesn't fit with our ambition to release finance staff as early as possible in order to look at the future rather than reporting on the past and support things like transformation and savings programmes. The review of deadlines in the context of competing demands on audit teams from different categories of public sector organisations is therefore also welcomed. Use by external auditors of internal audit work will hopefully make servicing of audits more efficient, and making accounts more relevant, simplified and understandable for users' needs is also welcomed. Next slide, please. So in summary, the Redmond review has had a broad remit, resulting in a wide range of recommendations. There's been early recognitions that things weren't working. The new arrangements had only been in place for the audit of accounts for 2 financial years, and the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government seems to be responding quickly to address the recommendations. Improvement to the local audit process are welcomed. There are limited resources available within local authorities and auditors, and there are high expectations and scrutiny on their deliverables and outputs. Dorset Council will adopt the outcomes from the recommendation, changes in legislation and the set for accounting code of practice. Next slide, please. Without reading through these are, I've included a list of acronyms that I've used in this PowerPoint. Next slide, please. And links to the documents referred to in this briefing, as I mentioned earlier. So for the Redmond review, the public sector auditor appointments response to the Redmond review, and the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government clarification of the way forward. Next slide, please. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time. And are there any questions or comments which we can discuss?
Thank you, Richard. Just one thing, first of all, Aidan, as our 151 officer, did you want to add anything to Richard's report?
Thank you, Matt. No, I think Richard's presented it very well, so I'll be really interested to hear what the committee has to say. Thank you. And
sorry, one question for you, Aidan. I know we had discussed on several occasions about getting some external training in for us as a committee. Have we got anywhere with that?
I've left that with colleagues in Democratic Services, so if I can, I'll follow up and I'll let you know if I may.
Because I think you were going to contact one of our well-known accountants who the LGA used to sort of perhaps give us a more fun version of accounts and auditing.
That's right. Yes, I'll check with Democratic Services and see where we've got to on that one.
Brilliant. Thank you. Before I throw this open to any questions from members, just a couple of comments that I'll pick up from Richard's report. There is mention about whether we need to have an independent member. Working with Jonathan Mayer, we are looking into that. Members, the new cohort onto this committee, Hayley Case from Democratic Services, will have sent you an email with regards to your qualifications and what training you feel would be suitable and helpful to you. The last I heard, not many of you had replied to her. Can I please ask that you do reply to her? And if you can't find that email, can you get in contact with her and try and get her to resend it through to you? Because it's quite important. The success of us as a committee is having the right people, the right training and the right information, and we all need to work together on that one. Do I have any questions from any committee members for Richard? I think you're going to get out of this one, Richard. I don't think there are any questions. I don't think. Oh, yes, we do. Councillor Richard Biggs.
Yeah, it's an interesting, and I've read through the government's response, which is very long. I did notice that the Redmond review highlighted the need for a single point body to deal with audit and local government. Well, we had the Audit Commission, which was abolished the Conservative government back in, I think it was the coalition, or it was 2015 anyway. You know, we seem to have been floundering since then, sort of in some sort of state of confusion, and sort of various delays, and that, you know, albeit that the Audit Commission was a bit bureaucratic, it was a single focus, and it meant sort of standards were the same across the country. I'm not really convinced, you know, that anything is going to be improved following that. I don't know if there's any, if I've missed something in there.
If I can, Councillor Biggs, yes. The Office of Local Audit Regulations, as you say, that would be the new body that they're proposing, the MHCLG are proposing to bring in, and I guess much like the public sector auditor appointments, so they were there as a single body as well. But I think you know, the view is through the Society of County Treasurers that they're not convinced that a new body would help either. I think for much of this report, they're quite recently released, so you know, the Redmond review in September and the MHCLG response to that in December. I think really it's waiting for you know, what comes through in practice. So we'll see more in spring when the MHCLG you know, respond more on the leadership side of things of the system, and you know, we'll do what we can to comply with what comes through that, or you know, what's legislated for, and the changes that sit for make for the Code of Accounting Practice for local authorities, which we'll comply with. But yes, it's, you know, seeing what happens in practice to bring around improvements is yet to be seen.
Did you want to come back on anything there, Richard?
No, I think it's a case of watch this space, isn't it? But you know, I think one of the area highlights was the sort of delay in audit reports for various reasons, and the staffing availability and qualifications. All these issues have been around for quite a while, so it'd be interesting to see if there is any improvement, but that's just general comment, really.
Yeah, thank you. As there's no other questions coming through, Richard, thank you very much for your presentation, much appreciated and very well detailed. Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
Right, members, move on now to agenda item 10, which is constitutional changes. Over to you, Jonathan Mayer.
Good morning, Chairman. Jonathan Mayer, Corporate Director for Legal and Democratic and the Council's Monitoring Officer. One change to the Constitution to report to you, please, and that relates to Standing Order 14, which deals with members submitting a notice of motion to the full council. So standing orders have provided that when a councillor wants to submit a motion on notice to council, a decision is made about that by the proper officer after consulting the chairman of council. So after consulting group leaders about this, I'll be making a change to the Constitution so that in future a decision is made about whether a notice of motion is a valid one after consulting not just the chairman of council but also the political group leaders. Thank you, Chairman.
Jonathan, is that something that we need to vote on, or are you just making us aware of?
It's just a matter for report to you, Chairman.
Thank you. Do any members have any questions on that for Jonathan? I'll take the lack of an RTS coming up as no, so thank you very much, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Agenda item 11 is the forward plan. A couple of bits have been moved around because SWAP wanted to change a couple of things, so the report they bring back to us would be more up to date rather than a series of sorry, we haven't finished that yet. So you will note that those changes are coming through for, I believe, April. Do any members have any comments on our forward plan? I'll take the quiet and the lack of an RTS as no. Thank you very much for that one. Agenda item 12 and 13 are urgent items and exempt business, which to my knowledge we have none. For committee members, remember we have got a training session straight after this. You will need to log off of this one and re-log back in on a separate invite. Can we add external audit update to February's meeting? Oh yes, sorry Aidan, yeah. Do we want to do that, or do we want to be more certain that Ian House is going to have the report ready for us before we do that? I'm slightly sceptical because I've been promised our update for quite a while. What do you think?
I think it'd be helpful if we could put it on the agenda to maintain a little bit of focus. If we could have the external update on the February agenda, and as we get a bit nearer, it may be necessary that we defer the item. But at this point, I'd welcome it being on the published agenda.
Okay, thank you, Aidan. Susan, can you arrange for that to be added to the agenda, please?
Yes, of course,
the full
Chairman.
plan, please, and obviously
Yes.
the agenda. Yeah, so as I was saying, thank you all very much. As I say, please do log back in for the training session, which starts, I believe, at 12 o'clock. Is that right, Susan?
That's right, Chairman. So you've got a quick 10-minute break before the start.
Brilliant. Thank you all very much. Thank you to members. Thank you to officers. Take care and see you all soon. Thank you. Bye.